In this video, we're going to take a 3D subject and put it into our scene and incorporate it in our footage to make it look like they're actually in the footage. Our very first step before we jump into Resolve is to actually acquire the 3D model. There's many places that you can do this. One that I like in particular is Mixamo here, and that's by Adobe. So let me go ahead and sign into my account so that you can see the options that we have on this particular website. This particular video obviously won't be a review of this website, so I'll kind of quickly go over some of the things here. As mentioned, you can always get the 3D models anywhere on the web. I just particularly like this one. Here we have the animations. Let me head over into the characters. I'm going to choose a character here. And then obviously we can come over to the animations. We'll go to search. Maybe we'll choose something like dance. And we have hip hop dancing there. So we can choose this for an option. We can make the adjustments over here. Again, this isn't a review of this particular website. We'll come over to download. Now under format, you have a few options. You have FBX, which is pretty common, FBX for Unity, and the last option there, which is DAE. And that's actually the one that we're going to choose. The others, they have their function. They have a lot more nodes. We only need this for one specific purpose. And with this particular format, it will give us the mapping that we need. We'll address this a little bit later in the video, but just suffice to say that in this particular case, if you're going to use this website, you do want to choose this option here. All the other settings will leave the same. Obviously, if you wanted to adjust this, you can do 24 frames per second if that fits your timeline, unless you are doing it for 30. The keyframe reduction, not necessarily. This is all stuff that you can look into. And then we'll click on download. Now there is a little bit of a catch here, and one of the best options that we have to use in Fusion is something called Alembic, but as you saw, we didn't have that option here on this particular website. If you were to look for this and looking for character animations such as we're seeing here, Alembic would probably be your best bet because of the way that it maps the skin and because it uses the animation more effectively. So what do we do now? There's one more step in this particular case using this website that we have to do before we bring it into Resolve. And that additional step is to open up this program here, which is Blender, which is an actual 3D program. Trust me, there's not too much that we have to do here, so this will be nice and easy. I'll click in the screen here. Let's hit delete to delete the box, come up to File, Import, and then we'll locate that DAE file that we just downloaded from the Adobe website. Again, the reason that we're doing this is because Resolve doesn't actually import these files. We don't have to worry about making any adjustments here. You don't have to go into any of the other workspaces. All we have to do is come up to File, Export, and then Alembic. If we come down to the bottom here, let me scroll down a little bit. You can see that it includes a few things here. Just want to find a directory that you want to send it to, and then we'll just hit Export Alembic. And that's all we're doing in Blender. Blender is a free program, so you don't have to worry about buying something new just to get this done. And one more time, you don't have to do this if you just download an Alembic file. So now let's go ahead and head over into Resolve. So in order to get started, the first thing that we want to do is come up to the effects library. And then from here, I'll choose Effects under the toolbox. I'll choose Fusion Composition. Let's go ahead and just drag this into the timeline. And there we go. Now that we have the Fusion Composition, I'm going to head over to the Fusion workspace. I've already imported the footage that we're going to use for the background. Right now, when you create a Fusion Composition without creating one using footage that you already have in the timeline, this is what you see on the Fusion workspace. You just have the media out. So we need to put a media in. We need to feed footage into that media out. Heading over into the media pool, I'll grab that footage and drag it down into our node tree area. I'll drag this up to the left viewer, and there's our footage. Let me go ahead and scrub through this. And just for good practice, I'll leave it at the first frame, so we'll leave it there. I'll close the media pool window because we don't need that at the moment. You'll see right now that the media out isn't showing anything. We have a white circle on the right hand side, which is supposed to be the second viewer, but nothing's there. Obviously that's because we haven't hooked anything up. We do now, there it is. They both look exactly the same, of course, because we haven't made any adjustments. From here, I'm going to hit Control and Space, and that brings up our list of tools. What I'm going to choose now is I'll type in Tracker, and that brings up our tracker options. What we need here is a 3D tracker because we're going to put it in 3D space. What that is the top one there. It's the camera tracker. So select that, choose Add. Now you can actually put this wherever you want. For me, I usually put it up top here, and then I'll connect the out from the media in into the tracker. I'm going to left click on this, drag it up until it's in the left viewer. You can see up here where it says camera tracker. So now we know which node that is. On the right hand side, you see the different options that we have for the camera tracker. Again, we want to make sure that we're at the first frame. And then here I'll choose auto track so that we can actually track the footage. Just so you can see what we're doing, I'm going to click over here so we just have the one window, and let me make it a little bit bigger here. The next step in the process is to come over to the third option in the camera tracker and hit Solve. What Solve basically does is let you know how good all the tracks that it determined that you needed effectively help your scene. You'll see what I mean in a moment. Let's go ahead and click on Solve. Okay, now we have our results. We don't necessarily have to worry about too much. There are a lot of adjustments you can make depending on how well your solve comes out. The thing that we're primarily focused on is the average solve error. Right now it's 0.9478. Let's go ahead and make some adjustments. If we look at our tracking points in the main window here, the green is good, yellow is not so good, and then the red is probably not the best options that you have. There is some orange. So what we can do to help improve this solve error is select a few like this. I'm left clicking and dragging. They'll highlight with that yellow, and I'll hit delete on my keyboard. So let's do this a few places here, maybe some here. I'll drag the timeline, and you can see there's a little bit more. There's a red one here and another yellow one, so let's do that. I see some more here. I'm going to delete those. There's a red one, an orange, and a red one, and you can see exactly what we're doing. So continue through the footage. There are more automatic ways to do this, but I find this way to be more efficient. You can come over here and adjust the track filtering. I don't mind doing it this way, and it's more visual for me. So let's go ahead and select those, do this. We don't really need that because we're more focusing in this area, maybe down here. So let's get rid of that red one. And then maybe these two up here. Now that we have those, let's hit solve again and see what result we get this time. Okay, now our average solve error is 0.51. Anything under 1 is pretty good. Before we had 0.9. 0.5 obviously is much better. We can continue to refine this and make it much better. For what we need it for, 0.5 is going to be perfectly fine. Honestly, we don't need the tracker anymore. We can just leave it connected. It won't really affect anything that we're doing. Let me adjust this window here. Bring up the 2 view. The last step before we import our 3D footage, and we will come back to this effect in a little bit, is we're going to apply these settings so that it creates nodes for us. So we'll come over to the 1/4 from the left, and then choose export. We have these additional nodes that were created. I'm going to select them and drag them over to the right here. And we don't need a direct line from the media into the media out, so I'll disconnect it from here and drag it from the camera tracker renderer, which is the last node in the line there, over to the media out. As mentioned before, you won't really notice too many differences between the two because we haven't done anything to cause a huge difference between those two outputs. I do see the plane in here. If I scroll in here, you can see the plane that we're going to put our subject on. We don't need to see it. So for the time being, let's go ahead and come into the ground plane, down to visibility, and let's turn that off for the time being. Next thing we can do is come up to the top where it says Fusion, go into Import, and then choose Alembic Scene. I'll find my model, select it, and click on Open. The way this looks is perfectly fine. We don't need the cameras in this case, the meshes, the UVs, normals, all that stuff is fine. So leaving everything the way that you see it, I'm going to click on OK. And if I drag this up to the left viewer, you'll see what we have here. And that is our 3D model that we downloaded from the website. Obviously, this doesn't look correct, and we're going to fix that right now. The next step is dragging in the diffuse PNG that we have. And this will just apply the skin, basically, to our model here. So if I drag this down, and let's bring it up to the second view where you can see what's going on here. Now, of course, this looks ridiculous, but this has to do with UV mapping and things along those lines. You have something like this, and the UV mapping essentially tells the system how to apply that to your mesh. That's outside the scope of this video. Let me go ahead and show you how we can apply this to our particular model. I'm dragging this to the left. I'm going to right click and choose Rename. Let's go ahead and call this 3D model. And then I'm dragging the output of that into our new options down here. And if you look up here, let me close the media pool. It's applied that texture onto our 3D model. Now, because these are essentially all the same thing, I'm going to select these three at the end, choose Ctrl G to group them together. And that way it's less confusing when we're looking at it. Now I'm going to click on the Merge 3D and bring it over here into this scene. And then I'm going to take our 3D model and then connect it up to the ground plane. Because what we want to do is attach this 3D model to the floor that we're going to attach to our 3D tracker. You'll see what I mean in a moment. So let's drag the out from here into the ground plane. Now if we scroll in, you can see our 3D model down there. Okay, so in order to adjust this, what I'll do right now is drag the media out into our left. It doesn't matter which viewer you put it in, it's just a matter of keeping track of which node is in which viewer. So normally I'll have the media out going to the right. It doesn't matter, I'll drag it over here to the left. You can see the obvious option. It's kind of mirroring what we're seeing on the right hand side, and our model is basically laying down. I'll select our shape node down here, and you can see our 3D options. The Z-axis is blue, the X-axis is red, and the Y-axis in this case is Y. So what we need to do is rotate on the X-axis. We basically want to keep that level and rotate it up. Let's come over to the transform options over here with the translation, which is left, right, and rotation, which basically speaks for itself. I have the first one selected, the XYZ, which is actually the default. Let's come in here to the X, as mentioned before, and rotate it on the X-axis. And in actuality, we don't have to guess where this goes. What I'll do is double click so everything's selected, and I'll just type in 90 for 90 degrees. If you look in the left-hand viewer, you'll notice that it's a lot more realistic and our model is standing upright. Okay, we have a couple more steps. Let's come back into the camera tracker now. And I'll drag the timeline indicator right about the middle. Right about there is good. That's fine. It doesn't necessarily have to be directly in the middle. I think that should be sufficient because we're going to make a ground plane over here. We're going to tell the system what part is the floor. We need to make sure that the camera tracker node is selected. We'll come over to the right hand side here. The 3D scene transformation. We'll expand that, change this from aligned to unaligned. And now we have these set from selection options. So as I alluded to a few minutes ago, let's select these because I want that to be our ground plane. Obviously, because it looks like it's on the ground and it has a little bit of depth. We have some that are a little bit closer to the camera, a little bit farther away. So we'll come over into the orientation, selection XZ plane, and that's the ground. There's another option for wall, which is the XY plane. We need XZ plane, set from selection. Now nothing happened, but as long as you clicked on that, you can rest assured that something did happen. You'll notice on the right hand side that all the numbers changed there. And with that same selection, let's come up to origin and hit set from selection. Same thing. Nothing happened with our model, but all the numbers on the right hand side here changed. So in order for this to actually do something, we have to come up to update previous export. And there you go. Now our model appears to actually be standing on the ground. There's a couple more things to address and then we're basically done. So if I scrub through this footage here, you'll see how our 3D model here appears to be going off screen. In order to move our model, we could obviously come into the options here for the actual 3D model and use the translation to move left and right and adjust all these parameters. But we can also just drag the 3D handles that we have. Let me show you what I mean. If I drag this up into our first viewer, we have the 3D models and you can see where we have the X, Y, and Z options. Obviously the proportions on this are a little bit off. That's perfectly fine. I'm holding down Alt and moving my middle mouse button. So this sort of mirrors what we're looking at on the right hand side. What I'll do now is grab this X option and drag it to the right. And there you are. Now the 3D model is more in the scene. If we come over here, drag it around. We'll notice that our subject stays in frame throughout the entire length of the footage. Now in this case, the subject doesn't intersect with that big stump in the middle, the big tree stump in the middle of the scene there. If it were to do something like that, I do have another video. I'll link that in the description below. And that's where you would just either make a mask within the Fusion tab, or in that video, all I do is create a second instance of the footage and mask out the part that we wanted to keep up front. Right now, we only really have one more thing that we have to do, and that's just blend our subject into the surroundings. Now, with this particular video, we're not going into too much depth with ambient occlusion and environment maps or anything like that. We're just doing a quick, effective way of getting our subject into the footage. So the last step, we only really need the one window. I'll bring this down just a little bit, drag our media in, which is our background footage. Up here, we have our color corrector node. I'll drag that down. Next step, I'll drag our 3D model to the left because what I'm going to do is disconnect the connection to the actual shape. You'll see that now anything that we mapped before isn't there. I'm going to put this into our color corrector node and then down here, and then we have our skin back. Now obviously we can come in here, we can make some adjustments. You have the option to manually do this, but there's actually an automated option too. We do have to do one more step before we get to that point though. Let me reset this. I'm going to take the media in and then also connect that to the color corrector node. On the right hand side with the color corrector node selected, I'm going to change it from colors to histogram. Let me zoom in a little bit here. and then change histogram type from keep to match. So quickly, essentially what that did was analyze the scene and it brought in the colors. It doesn't look perfect here. There is an option here to match the luminance. We're not going to touch that in this case. The match RGB is all the way at 1. I'm going to drag that down a little bit because I want the effect, but I don't want it to perfectly match the background. So let's slide that a little bit to the left. And that's a little bit better. So if I disable it, you can see what we had before. And now it fits into the scene just a little bit more because in reality, any of the colors with the light rays will be bouncing off these different objects and then reflecting back into the person. It just places the subject more into the scene. This may be outside the scope of this video, but it may be obvious that this subject is on top of the ground. You could always come into the color tab and make a window and blur it out a little bit. But here we are back on the edit tab. Obviously you can make some additional refinements. You can actually go back into the color corrector and adjust the contrast or any of those options there. Maybe adjust the colors if you need to, add a second node, things like that. But for a quick option to add models into your footage, this is how you do it. As I mentioned before, we could always come up to the media pool, drag a second instance of the footage down here. Let me shorten that up. Come over into our color tab. Let's create a window. I'm going to right click, add alpha output. There's our footage. I'll come down to softness. Let's adjust the outside. And then if we come back to our edit workspace, you can see how the feet blend into the ground there. Obviously, you could refine that a lot more. And then one additional step that you can do to bring everything together is maybe come over into the effects tab. Instead of fusion composition, we can use adjustment clip. So I'll select that, come over into our color workspace, come here, and then maybe just select a particular LUT. And there you are. Now you've basically tied the whole scene together and it's a little more seamless. Thanks for watching. If you haven't already, I'd appreciate you subscribing to the channel. If you like this, go ahead and share it with some people that you think might be interested in it too. All the links to my socials are in the description below. And I hope to see you guys in the next video.